Again to another interesting seminar. Today the topic is how the City of Toronto uses vehicle flow provider data for evaluation, monitoring, and prioritization. And we've got a very interesting speaker. So Raphael Dumas is the lead for City of Toronto's Transportation Data Operations and Emerging Mobility team. I think you're friends with Jesse Coleman?
Yes.
Or in the same team, maybe?
Yes, he's been
okay. Yeah, so Jesse presented 2 weeks ago, and that was a pretty impressive presentation as well. So before working at the City of Toronto, Raphael was doing transit data analysis for the MIT Transit Research Group while getting a dual master's in city planning and transportation engineering. So he's a famous data guy, apparently. So please go ahead and start.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. So the vehicle Perp provider data is kind of one of our foundational data sets. Our former general manager, Stephen Buckley, who created the Big Data Innovation team, really kind of created that team around the knowledge that there were these passive, automatically collected data sets out there, and that they were going to revolutionize the way departments of transportation do primarily project evaluation, but also monitoring, traffic monitoring, and prioritization work. And that, but in order to kind of actually harness the power of this data, that we needed people with stronger analytic skills in government, because it's a lot of data. So today's outline is a very brief explanation of what this data is and a number of examples of how we've used it. And one of the two reasons that I'm presenting here today, or one of my motivations for presenting, is that we are hopefully going to have an open data release of this data. And so kind of pretty excited to be able to allow students and researchers to get access to this, even though some of you probably already have access to it. Which would also save us time, because we respond to a lot of data requests for this data in particular. And also we are hiring a lot of positions. So giving you a different overview than my boss, Jesse Coleman, of some of the work that we do. Yeah, so what is vehicle Perp provider data? So there are navigation companies that provide driving directions, and they use live traffic data in order to be able to route you in real time. The main example that I think most of you can think of is Google and or Waze, but the other kind of big players in this space are Inrex, TomTom, and Here. And so there's a synergistic element to this where the navigation companies are basically tracking their users in order to get that real-time traffic information. But they also can kind of enhance the data, the real-time data that they're providing by also operating some of them in the telematics space. So large fleet operators for logistics companies will have kind of a more, I guess, advanced, this is really not my area of expertise, more advanced onboard computer that is phoning home a lot of data, and they have some kind of third party who is monitoring and processing that data both in real time and historically to provide them, I don't know, key performance indicators on how their vehicles are being used and also how their vehicles are operating. Allegedly, these navigation companies will also purchase data from, I guess, the shadier market of data brokers, which would be different kind of mapping software development kit companies in, I guess, primarily the mobile space, like your map boxes, or potentially somewhat more sketchy operators, and they, when you open an app, like track your position, and I guess maybe, I don't know, if they're tracking enough of your positions, they can derive speed data. And so from those kind of data sources, we get, or the navigation company gets a combination of path speeds, which are derived from the distance traveled between kind of GPS positions that are timestamped, and so that an element of that, the quality of that data depends on the polling frequency of the GPS, and then we also get point speeds, which would be like directly from a speedometer from those kind of telematics platforms, and so these companies have created a bit of a side hustle, like their primary product is real-time navigation, but they found out that government agencies, and presumably, I don't know, maybe other companies are interested in this real-time and historic traffic data. Real-time more from a like active traffic management perspective, and that's typically your like highway departments that have like want to provide kind of rapid response to dealing with congestion issues, or people like us who want to do all of the analyses that I'll talk about very shortly. Based on our experience, some of the limitations of this kind of data, well actually, first of all, the like really amazing advantage of this kind of data is it is huge, which is its own limitation, but we have ostensibly coverage over like the entire City of Toronto network, with, I guess, also ostensibly like not, no bias across geographies, which means that we can compare, using one data set can compare different areas in the city. It's also like permanent and pervasive. So for like traffic data in particular, which is otherwise very expensive to collect, either by deploying Bluetooth sensors or by performing human travel time runs. Instead, we have this one data set, and we don't have to be particularly premeditated about setting up before counts or before data collection for any kind of intervention. We can just purchase the data, and our data goes back to 2012, I think. And so we have opportunities to do a lot of different comparisons with that. Anyways, back to the limitations. So even though I just said like it covers very wide kind of geographic coverage, on lighter trafficked roads and streets, so your minor arterials and below, the number of observations can be very or relatively sparse. And so as a consequence of that, we generally recommend for kind of our before-after analyses or for modeling purposes to use at least 3 weeks of data to get a kind of more stable average. Another quirk is the kind of vertical axis is not considered in GPS coordinates. So there is some difficulty properly matching or doing proper map matching on stacked road plans. And the example I'll give is if you've ever driven on Gardner or Lakeshore where they're stacked on top of each other, your navigation app can sometimes think that it's actually on the other roadway. Or also it just doesn't give you like the proper directions based on, or like it's not properly tracking traffic. Yeah, so our data processing, we try to work in the open. Our data processing work is definitely in the open. Our like more analytic work tends not to be because we don't want to preempt our results by having other people see them before we've properly figured out what we're doing. But so if you go to GitHub and you find the city of Toronto, for historical reasons, the data and analytics unit used to be called the Big Data Innovation Team. So our GitHub repositories under City of Toronto are prefixed still by UT-ITE, which is the acronym for the Big Data Innovation Team. And you can find all of our data processing pipelines under the data sources repository. And the data set that I'm talking about today are kind of pipelines for pulling from the API is under the here folder. And then the work that I'm going to be talking about after all of the examples is being done in the congestion repository. It hasn't yet been, merged into master, but if you're kind of interested in how we aggregate the more disaggregate data, because maybe you want to replicate that with your own disaggregate data, you can find out about that. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to dive into a bunch of examples with a pretty heavy caveat that my team works more on the operations side, the data operations side, not the operations side. And so I will not necessarily be able to answer some specific questions of like, what actually is going on here, or like what the key takeaways were. But so one of the uses for this data, because we are kind of getting it on a daily basis, is monitoring. And so during the pandemic, we had this kind of like mega indicator project, which has culminated into a weekly email to the stakeholders of what our kind of continuously, what our continuous data sets are showing in terms of what's happening during the pandemic. And so this is a graph of the travel time index, which, if you don't know, is kind of travel time during a time period over free flow, which is like how fast or how much time would it take if there was no traffic for someone to travel on a particular link. And so we can aggregate it at a citywide level, possibly weighted with volume. And so that is what we've been tracking as a like, how has traffic been doing throughout the pandemic? So the middle gray line is our 2019 to 2020 baseline. So an entire year, which was just under 1.8. And then we have kind of these daily vertical bars and a 10-day moving average for the weekday PM peak. And then all of the various stages of the pandemics have been noted. And you can see how some stages impact congestion and others not so much. This was also used as a map of, congestion hotspots, or we can also use this to create maps of congestion hotspots. You may have been aware that there were a lot of pilot projects that the City of Toronto deployed during the pandemic, all of which, or many of which are suffixed with TO. And so I'll run through some of the examples. Rapid TO was a bus lane project in Scarborough on Eglinton, Kingston, and Morningside to improve bus travel times. We were also able to use vehicle pro provider data to monitor the effect of removing a lane of traffic and dedicating it to buses, as well as we also monitor kind of impact on, I guess, cross streets. There's a complete street pilot in Midtown Toronto on Yonge Street, where I guess a lane of traffic in each direction was taken away in order to provide protected bike lanes. There's a dashboard. There's a PDF report looking at a number of key indicators, vehicular travel time being one of them, and so showing kind of various time periods, like time of day periods over time, and then also kind of a before after by time of day on different corridors, I think, and then kind of overall aggregate changes in travel time. So these examples you can find on the toronto.ca website. If you search for RapidTO or ActiveTO Midtown, then there'll be more reports. On the prioritization fund, this is like a little bit of a sketchier use of the data, and that's mostly because as mentioned, there are kind of two different types of data that feed into the link level speeds, those being probe and path data. And the bulk of the data comes from path data, so deriving a speed by distance traveled over time, which is dependent on the polling frequency of the GPS. But that also means that kind of distance-weighted average speed is also affected by traffic signals, stops, I don't know, like reacting to a deer running across the street or whatever.
Are there deers on the roads in Toronto?
Or like a streetcar stopping. Whereas your probe speed are like point speeds. However, what we've seen is the probe speed data, because it comes from fleets, those people tend to drive the speed limit. And so we don't actually see a lot of speeding from the point speed data. But despite kind of caveats around path speed data, we are actually able to identify evidence of speeding. And this is also an example where there can be some kind of geographic bias, because the spatial resolution of the links is so small, like they're such short links, like less than 100 meters, that you may be able to have one link where like the speed is affected by a traffic signal, but another link it wouldn't be. And so to some degree, I don't know, maybe a little bit of a sketchy way to have a kind of holistic prioritization scheme based around that. But nevertheless, this is fed into, we've provided this data to the police services for them to prioritize their traffic control patrols, and it has also fed into the prioritization or the sighting of speed cameras, where they are using kind of a number of different data sets. Those cameras can only be placed in community safety zones that contain school by provincial law. But so there's a bit of a comparison of all of those and like how much speeding is happening in these locations, how many collisions, how much traffic, et cetera, et cetera. We've also been using this as kind of feeder into modeling where different types of collisions happen. Collisions are an interesting data problem where at a kind of aggregate level, there is a lot of data and we would really like to reduce the number of collisions. But in terms of like prioritization, comparing one location to another, at any given location in the past 10 years, there actually hasn't been that many collisions. And so therefore, how exactly do you comprehensively kind of prioritize different locations? And so we've been using various statistical models. Don't ask me any questions about this. And one of the data sets feeding into that has also been this kind of evidence of speeding based on link level speeds. In terms of our other examples of uses, so I've presented at least once here, find me on YouTube, about our work on vehicle for hire. One of the things that we've been trying to do in that reporting is determine where the volumes of private transportation companies are highest, and then look to see if we can find evidence that that large volume of vehicles is making congestion worse in those areas. And in order to derive, well, so we're getting origins and destinations of trips and now kind of various stages of the trip life cycle. But in order to convert that to vehicle volumes, we need to route those trips. And in order to more accurately route them, we use historical traffic data from when the trips were actually occurring. So this uses the 5-minute resolution data for the day in particular that we're trying to route. And then because there isn't necessarily data on every single link for every 5-minute bin, our vendor has provided a model of the data that we can use to kind of gap fill. And so if you're interested in the very high level summary of the very gory details, we generate a routing network for every 5-minute bin and then assign or route all trip origins and destinations starting in that 5-minute bin using a combination of PG routing and Python multi-threading. And that leads us to be able to map the proportion of PTC volumes as a proportion of kind of overall vehicular volumes in every neighborhood. We also get a lot of data requests for this data for calibrating micro simulation models. And one of the big requests that we get internally is on an annual basis is for traffic signal retiming. So we get report average travel times from traffic signal to traffic signal on the corridors that they're trying to retime. And this is one of the things that is inspiring our OpenData release. So as mentioned, this data has a very fine resolution, which leads to actually a few problems, being that the data is very large, and so people can have kind of a number of ways of, where there are many paths to aggregating that data up to something that can be more usable for before after analysis or anything else. And so we wanted to ensure that we had a standardized way of aggregating that. Also with the fine kind of geospatial resolution of the data means that like a lot of relatively large amount of work has to go into drawing in kind of segments and corridors for each individual project. And so there's a motivation to create a network that is aggregated in space and time to make it, to reduce errors in aggregation and reduce the amount of time both for queries and for drawing. And so for the spatial aggregation, the nodes are traffic signals or I don't know, something on highways, and meaningful locations on highways. And then the overall network is using links that are either minor arterial, major arterial, or expressway. There are approximately 100 traffic signals. Also, so that we could release this as OpenData, we had to conflate this to the city's centerline, and encountered many kind of quirks of the two different networks. One of them being that not all the traffic signals occur at locations that are deemed intersections by the centerline. And we get a new vehicle pro provider map on an annual basis, and so the network generation and conflation will have to be performed annually. And for the temporal aggregation, it happens in 3 steps. First, on a link basis, going from 5 minutes to 1 hour, so averaging that travel time, and then on a segment basis, summing up the travel time for the individual segments for each hour, where at least 80% of the segment is covered by data by length. And then on a monthly basis, by hour for weekday or weekend, generating statistics on those kind of day-hour aggregations. And so we're getting from this kind of spatial coverage of links to more manageable network such as this. Some of the challenges are the center line represents streets with medians differently than the vehicle pro provider does, where because it's for routing, it actually more accurately kind of draws its own center line in the kind of directional right-of-way. Another issue is the city installing traffic signals at mid-block locations. I don't know, can't really complain, but so when this is eventually on OpenData, is that even readable? We will have network representation, which will be at the segment level, which will have the name of the street and the name of the from street and the name of the to street, length, whether it's a highway or not, and cardinal direction. And then the travel time data will be at a month, hour, is this a weekday or a weekend resolution, which I think should mean that a month of data could be loaded into Excel. Thereabouts, which should make it a relatively manageable data output. While I'm talking about OpenData, well, I guess I'm not entirely sure when this is going to go live. We're like pretty close. but still need to do some approvals and other paperwork. In terms of other open data we have all of our turning movement counts are on open data, and then a variety of different data sets from our Watch Your Speed program are also on open data. While I'm here and while we have time, so all of those like feedback signs that display the speed of objects moving past them, the vendor of that data set had, I don't know, just for whatever reason, performance monitoring, tracks or like records every single observation in their cloud platform, and so we're able to download that. The city has both a kind of school zone Watch Your Speed program where signs are permanently installed, and then a mobile one where on a like monthly-ish rotation basis they get installed at different locations in a ward by request. They are ostensibly the same signs. The reason that there are two different data sets is because the signs that move don't have coordinates associated with where they move. And so instead we are tracking the locations based on kind of a like contractor inventory of like what the contractor who's installing them is saying, this is where I've installed this, and now I've removed it, and so that location all exists as text, and we haven't kind of determined an automated text to location conversion for that data set that we would be willing to put onto OpenData. So we have two different data sets. Anyways, oh, and there's also Bluetooth data, which is available, but is not actually being updated on a regular basis. But we're working on it. So, if this sounds like maybe something you would like to work on, I don't know if any of you are PEY-aged students, but we're hiring a PEY. They will be shared between our data collection team and the data science and data operations teams. And that position is open right now, and it is closing on Monday, so use the weekend to apply. If you are a recent grad or deciding, hey, the master's is not for me, I'm just kidding. Anyways, if you're interested in being a research analyst, we are also hiring 7 research analysts in data operations, data science, and data collections. I wrote this is good, and I forgot to, life moves fast. This is barely live right now. Go to jobs.toronto.ca. I guess that position will close in about 3 weeks. And if you feel like you're a more senior individual and want to be the team lead of data science, that is also actively being hired for. And I guess the position closes in a week-ish? 25th, yeah. Oh, you can see that better than I can see this. That's my presentation, thank you.